Well, hello, and welcome to a series of videos that we're performing on Norming Resource Manager. Norming software is well known for their asset management solution with asset accounting, asset leasing, asset maintenance, and asset tracking. But did you know that Norming has a resource manager solution that is geared for operations, nonprofits, service-based businesses that have a project orientation around the need to track things like expense reports, timesheets, leave tracking, overtime, purchases, AP invoices, or sales quotations? Well, Norming Resource Manager is exactly that kind of a product. So what we want to do in today's presentation is review the overall functionality of Resource Manager, and we're going to focus on timesheets, expenses, leave tracking, and overtime. But just so you know, some of the more recent additions to the portfolio include e-purchase capabilities, time and attendance with GPS tracking, what we call geofencing, if you're familiar with that term, and then some other new features around AP payments and OE sales quotes. Now, Resource Manager is an employee-based portal, and when we say that, we have a back office application that runs as Resource Manager, an application module within Sage 300. And this is fully integrated into the rest of Sage 300 applications. And as part of that, there's a specific time management component which supports web-based timesheets, overtime, and leave tracking, as well as attendance. There's also employee expense reports, which can be reviewed and approved, along with travel requests. There's also then a web portal, which allows you to have remote employees who are traveling or people who are non-accountants but still need access to information in Sage 300 or are doing activities which ultimately needs to be recorded as a transaction within Sage 300 by using a web portal or a native smartphone app based on the Android operating system, which you can download for free on Google Play Store, or an iOS smartphone, iPhone, or iTablet based on the iTunes app. So Resource Manager is really facilitating remote access in a controlled fashion through what we call approval workflows for people that need the information to be updated into Sage 300, but we want to maintain the validity and the security to make sure that only valid transactions are getting set up within Resource Manager and ultimately Sage 300. So that's what an employee portal does. It gives employees access to information, the ability to create transactions, and for people to participate in workflow approvals with email notifications, but directly linked into Sage 300. And as we've shown, we've got the traditional web portal, ESS, employee self-service, as well as smartphone applications for Apple and Android. And then the back office application, which you saw just a few moments ago, Resource Manager, which is completely embedded in the Sage 300 Classic desktop, fully integrated into the Sage 300 database, and all of the common services and administrative services that are part of System Manager. So it's an all-in-one solution that allows real-time access to information, uses workflow approvals to ensure that only valid data is being recorded in Sage 300. It's fully integrated with true integration, no import-export, no intermediary file. The database integration from Resource Manager is directly into the Sage 300 database tables, and a very affordable solution based on the licensing of the web portal. These are all of the areas that Resource Manager addresses, whether it's the e-purchasing with requests for quote and transactions for POs, receipts, and invoices, AP invoices and payments, the areas that we're looking at today with timesheet, time clock, leave tracking, and overtime, as well as travel requests, cash advance, and expense claims. There's also project management-based capability around Gantt charts and scheduling with resource planning, and then other requests such as internal inventory usage, sales quotations, and custom requisitions that allow you to create a workflow approval process around any master file update, like adding new vendors or new GL accounts, or other transaction processes, such as posting a GL batch. You can build a workflow approval in Resource Manager using the custom requisition feature. And then other miscellaneous tools such as custom reporting, the ability to email pay stubs to employees, and then scheduling tools where you can schedule reports to be run automatically, and email reminders that can be sent out as broadcast emails to remind employees to get their timesheets submitted, or for managers to get those timesheets or expense reports approved. So we configure Resource Manager in the back office, and there's a number of setup options when we're referring specifically to timesheets. So you have the ability to determine the time interval, and then do you allow multiple timesheets per pay period? Do you allow fractional time, negative time? The attendance features allow you to insert time clock functionality for clocking in and clocking out based on shifts, and the controls that you want to put around those clock in and clock out times, which is tied specifically to tracking attendance and whether people are using the system correctly. There's also a calendar for division, region, or department members. So you might have different calendars that are saved based on the groups that are recording time in your organization. The pay codes allow you to link directly into Sage 300 Canadian payroll, US payroll, or the norming payroll manager for international payrolls. And you can define unique formulas for how those pay codes are defined. You'll see the same type of functionality around the leave codes, where you can define your sick time, vacation time, and other leave codes within the system. And these leave codes allow you to define, as I said, annual leave for vacation, and then you can determine the rules for resetting and accruals. So it might be a monthly reset, and then the formula around that reset. So we give you access to all the database fields and then all of the formulas that are required, as well as the accrual formula. And then you can also specify a maximum number of days against which we're tracking annual leave or sick leave, depending on the types of leave that you need to track in the system. And then the overtime rules for timesheet purposes allow you to specify a rule that will determine when overtime applies. So there's the criteria, when it applies, and if it does apply, what's the formula for calculating it? And again, you've got access to all the fields in the database and the operators to create that formula. And then when it does get calculated, what is the pay formula? Do you bank, do you cash, and how do you determine how that overtime gets cleared out? So you've got when it applies, how it's calculated, and how it's paid. So those are the overtime rules that you can define in the system. And then the timesheet transactions, as we record them, will be set up, and you can include leave and overtime on those timesheets, or just have the system calculate that for you. So when we look at overtime, or let's look at leave as an example, there's a leave account history that's recorded against different individuals. So you can see as people are recording the sick time, they will have that recorded in the system by date and any comments. And the web portal allows you to apply for approval on that leave that you're taking. So those are the pieces of information that are recorded in the back office. You can also make leave requests as a leave request entry in the back office if you want, but we'll be showing this functionality through the web portal. Because one of the main reasons people use Resource Manager is to provide remote access to non-Sage 300 users in their organization, either because they're remote, which is what a lot of us are doing these days, working from home, or people who travel and need to access information about their expenses or timesheets, or they're on different job sites. Now, behind the scenes, there's an administrative portal that allows you to configure by user or by group the kind of information that you want to store and the way that the forms look that are presented in the web portal. So the web portal allows us to determine the layout of our expense forms, which fields are going to be shown, and if they are shown, are they editable, both at the submitter or employee level and the approver or manager level. Same thing with our timesheets. We can determine which fields are displayed and whether they're editable by the submitter and or the approver. So these are some of the control mechanisms that you have to create the forms that you need to. There's also different language sets, so we support French, Spanish, and other languages. And you can determine things like date formats. Because it's a web-based application, there's a lot of flexibility. So when we look at the individual portal entries, you log in as an employee. You can choose which Sage 300 company you would like to record the transaction against. So if we want to use the PJC only company, we can also run this against a company that's not running project and job cost. So depending on the nature of your organization, you have options. So if we look at timesheets as an example, and we click on the timesheet icon, when we click New, we're presented with a timesheet form based on the administrative services. You can choose the columns that you want to include. And because we're integrated to PJC, there's a listing of PJC contracts that this employee is working on and project details that they could assign their time to, as well as a category, and then the pay code. Now, you can add notes. This is a good customer, and that note will flow with the timesheet details. This is our standard timesheet entry, so this is where I'm just entering the time. And notice that it skipped over Saturday, Sunday. I have control in the back office when I'm looking at my timesheet options, whether I want to be able to set up specific dates and times or restrict access on the timesheet for not allowing time on holidays based on the calendar or on weekends. I can also override the unit cost on the PJC time card. So if I want to use a payroll rate rather than a cost rate in PJC, that is possible. Also note that when I'm on a particular cell, I can add a comment. And this comment will also flow with the timesheet details. And notice there's a little blue asterisk. And when I hover over the cell, the comment is displayed. Now, if there were contract details that I wanted to attach, then we also support document attachment. So I could say there are some contract details. I want to browse and pick up what those contract details are. So if I go to documents, this can be any file format that you like. It could be a PDF, an Excel sheet, a Word doc, really doesn't matter to us. Any document is fine. Now, if you're using our scheduling tool, then you can copy timesheets from a previous period. You can also assign different employees to the schedule and generate their timesheets automatically, and then they just review them. And they don't have to go in and enter all this information. Now, of course, I could enter a number of different lines here for different jobs that I was working on. Just for expediency in the demo, I'm going to just do one line. I could have also included leave codes as well. So I could choose, instead of a pay code, I could choose an overtime and calculate my overtime manually, or let the system calculate the overtime. So it just depends on how you've configured the system as to what you want to see. Now I'm going to add another day of time to make it an even 40. And you notice here I could have added another line, but we'll remove that. When I save the timesheet, it's available to be submitted. When I submit, it pushes it into an approval workflow. And this will display the approval audit trail, so I know which manager is going to be doing the approval, and that's Marilyn. Now, just to take a couple of minutes on the approval workflow, these approval workflows are configured in the back office by document type. So with the approval workflow, I could do it for expenses, I could do it for timesheets, leave requests, but just very quickly, notice that we use email as an alert function when timesheets are submitted, rejected, or approved, because we give you the option to create your own email templates, and you can choose again by document type the kind of information you want to put into the email, so you can let people know when their timesheet was approved, if it was rejected, with notes about why it was rejected, and when it's been submitted, an approval reminder to the manager to get it approved, and a link to the URL so they can click on that link on their smartphone, and it will take them to the approval console in Resource Manager. So these approval workflows allow us to go in and define who participates in the workflow approval, whether it's a PJC contract manager or just a region, division, department manager, or my supervisor, which is defined as a direct report in the system. And then I can also build in my own decision actions as well. So in the case where I wanted to create an approval workflow, let's say around an expense report, and I wanted this to have some additional business logic, we have what's called a decision action. And that decision action gives me the ability to create my own business logic. In this case, it's a dollar value threshold. So I could say that any expenses under $200 don't need approval, but between 200 and 500, one level of approval, and above 500, 2 or 3 levels of approval. And I can also add my own custom variables, link it to budget controls, or other criteria that I need to specify to meet my particular organization's policies around approving expense reports, or for that matter, timesheets. So I just thought I'd take a moment to describe that process that is configurable in the back office. But I've submitted the timesheet, and now I will log in as Marilyn to the appropriate Sage 300 company, and I will approve the timesheet based on my to approve list. Now I could have approved this on the smartphone as well, so either way is perfectly valid. There's the timesheet entry that's been submitted, and I see the attachment, and I can open up that attachment and view the contract details, which is what we're building, I guess. And then the timesheet entries, the comments are here, this is a great job, and the note. Now I could transfer this to another manager and say, I'd like you to take a look at this as well. And that would be an ad hoc change to the workflow. So even though we've defined a set workflow, if there are extenuating circumstances, you can always transfer and have another person approve. As a manager, I could also see in a multi-level approval environment who else has reviewed and approved this timesheet so far. If the manager was away, they can substitute another manager, so there are no bottlenecks in the system. But if they forget to substitute, there is a to-do list in the admin portal that allows us by company, so if we're looking at the PJC only company, that timesheet that was just created today by Freddie and needs to be, or by Robert, sorry, and needs to be approved by Marilyn, if we know Marilyn is away and she forgot to substitute, we could do the approval as a back office function, or we could transfer to another manager and make sure this timesheet gets approved on a timely basis. So just wanted to highlight that very quickly as another way of ensuring that there's proper flow through of these documents in the system. So I'm going to go ahead and approve, say OK. And when I approve this timesheet, it's removed from the approval portal. And where does it go? It goes directly into Sage 300. When we talk about true integration, this is what we're referring to. The timesheet batch is created in Sage 300 for the transaction that we just set up today. It knows that it's from the employee self-service portal, and all of the details captured in the portal are now a transaction batch within Sage 300. No importing or exporting, no rekeying, no special integration required. We've taken care of all of that for you. So the customer details with the PJC project, the role, the division that applies, the note that we added, and then the individual time entry details. So you will see any comments or notes attached here. This is a great job. The rates. Now this could be overridden in the back office if you want to. I could reject this, I could modify the rates, but I've got the approval audit trail with who's submitted and approved this timesheet. I have any attachments that are visible in the back office, any optional field information, and the document details. And if I'm okay with this, I would just, because I know it's already been approved at an operational level, I can go ahead and post this. Or I could ask for other changes or make those changes automatically from within Sage 300. Now you notice that a transaction error batch has been created because some of the details weren't correct. So it is validating the data that's coming across to make sure that only information that matches what's in the system is going to be recorded. But ultimately, what you would do is the time cards as they're submitted in the system will be set up as timesheet entries, either for expense detail against a time card entry or against timesheet details. So these timesheet details will be set up as project lines in the system and updated for the number of hours, the unit cost, and the wages and benefit account for the payroll accrual, as well as the work in progress account for the job costing. So ultimately, these time card entries are going to be set up based on the time cards that are approved through Resource Manager. And that's how we streamline the entry and approval process around timesheets and getting cost information updated to your PJC jobs. The same will be true with expense transactions, so we'll show you that in just a minute. But before we move on from that, let me go back and do a leave entry for you. So let's say we've got Robert again, and I want to do a leave entry because I want to take some time off. So the leave tracking would allow me to come in and see the history of what I've already taken, but then I also can create a new request. And it would show me the information that I have remaining. So I'll have 10 days remaining. I haven't taken anything yet for annual leave. On sick leave, you can see that I'm actually negative. I've taken more than I have for sick leave. So let's take a vacation day, and I could say I want to take it tomorrow, and I'm going to take it from 9 to 5. So I would specify the time frame and say that this will be my 8-hour day. So I'm going to take the full day. Now, I could have just said I want to take a full day. And then I want to say that I need a rest, and I want to save that. Okay, and then I could attach a document to say this is where I'm going to go, and I'll just put that in there. I have no idea what that is, and we'll save that and submit it into the workflow. Okay, and when we submit that into the workflow for annual leave, it would tell me whether I'm going to be able to take that leave or not. Okay. So likewise, it will start to list all of the days that I'm trying to take leave. And multiple people can be doing this at the same time, because anybody who's got access to the system will be able to log in, choose the company, and start to make these requests. So if Freddie also wants some time off, he could create a new entry. And for his annual leave, do the same thing and say, I hear Robert's taking a day off, so let's see if I can get some time off as well. And we will take it from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m., which is 17. And comments is, I need a rest too. And I could attach a document and all of that if I want, save and submit. So as these requests are being made, they start to stack up, they can be sent in, and then they will be approved online, and it will update the leave accounts for these employees. Likewise, I could also request overtime and say that based on my overtime bank, I want to be able to take some time, I want to be able to earn some overtime, okay? And it would show me my bank. Now, if the company has chosen to calculate overtime rather than making overtime requests, then you wouldn't make an overtime request. You would just configure the system to calculate overtime for you, and it would just do that as part of the timesheet processing. So next up, what we want to show you is the expense reporting. So here on the expense reports, I would click on expense. Before I do that though, let me just take a minute to talk about the travel request. You've got the ability to come in and request travel and get this approved beforehand. So you could say, I need to travel from Toronto to Chicago, and I need to go in May sometime, let's say from the 11th to the 14th. So that's 4 days and 3 nights, and it's a conference. And I could put in some attachments, put in an estimate to say, on those days, I estimate that I'm going to incur certain expenses. So maybe on the 11th, I have an expense code, and that's going to be my air ticket, which is going to be $550, and that's the flight to Chicago. And I can add all of these in as different attachments with the estimate and the location that I'm going, and submit that into a workflow approval to get that approved. And then it would show me who's going to approve that. Marilyn's going to approve that travel requests. But I can also just go in and do an expense report. If you don't do travel requests, I could create a new expense report. And what's defaulted here is air, hotel, and taxi. So very quickly, in the back office, the employee register, I have the ability to create different expense codes, and then I assign those expense codes to the employee, and that determines what I can enter on my expense report. So in this case, we're talking about Robert Embleton. The expense control page says these are the expense codes I'm allowed to record, and there's the GL account distribution, so I don't have to know that. An auto insert says that I want to be able to automatically enter certain lines on my expense report every time I create a new one. I can also put over limit checking on these expenses, so the system is warning me if I'm traveling too much and spending too much money. The expense codes themselves can be set up and defined, and you can have as many different expense codes as you wish. You can specify that they're reimbursable, or if they're non-reimbursable, they might be based on a corporate credit card, so they're not going to be reimbursable to me, but you want to record those on the expense report. You can determine the taxes that apply, which is particularly important in Canada with GST and different VAT taxes on meals. If you bill these expenses to customers, we give you the ability to create a billing rate, and then notes, if you want those employee notes added automatically. And then limiting expenses, you could have daily per diems on meals or monthly or year-to-date control. And you want to validate the number of days on the expense report. So if they're charging mileage, you want to make sure they're not charging for more days than they could in terms of business days in a month. So having done all of that, I can still come in here and I can verify the amounts. And so this was the flight to Chicago. And then the hotel, let's say it was $360, and that was the convention hotel, and I took a taxi from the airport. And then again, I could add an attachment here. Say this is the hotel receipts, and browse and pick up that hotel receipt. So I'll just use these downloads here. So it's that folio, save. And now I've got my expense report. Now, if I submit the expense report, it's validating the information, and it tells me that the resource for line 123 is not valid. So that means I need to look at my category here and say maybe it's subcontract. Because I'm a subcontractor, it's making sure that I get these classified correctly. I can also check the limit on these expenses, and you can see that for my ticket, hotel, and taxi, I've got a limit. This is what I've actually spent. There's nothing pending, So this is what's available and on this report. So I'm still under my budget by expense code. So this is something you can do during the approval process, or I could do it as an employee to make sure that I'm not going over. If you have credit card expenses, you can create a mapping table with that expense file and import your credit card details as line items on the expense report. So there are a number of ways that we can enhance the system. And again, the approval audit trail tells me that Marilyn is going to do the approval. So I'm going to log in then as Marilyn, do the approval, and just show you the integration to Sage 300 on the expense side, in this case into PJC, but also reimbursing through accounts payable. So I've got the to approve list here, and I've got my travel request and an expense report. We'll just take a look at the expense report. I've got the attachment, so I can open up the folio for the hotel. We stayed at the Hampton, and there's the expense report details. I could check the limits again as an approver, and I could transfer to another manager if I wanted to, but we're just going to go ahead and approve this, say OK, and it removes this from the approval console, and now it's set up in Sage 300 as an expense batch. So when I go to the expense batch list, I will see a transaction batch for today's date. It tells me that it's coming from the ESS portal, and all of the transaction details that were recorded in the portal are now recorded in Sage 300 with no limitation. So the approval audit trail with the comments, the date and the timestamp, the attachments for the hotel receipt, the totals, any recoverable tax or tax that is expensed separately for the VAT taxes in Canada, the tax jurisdictions that apply, and the document details. Now remember, this is against the PJC contract, so those details are allocated by expense line item. My comments have been added. Now we're going to reimburse through AP, so the system's been configured to create an AP invoice using the same document number for the invoice as we have for the expense voucher, and obviously then the employee has been set up as a vendor in AP. Now I could have checked the budget here as well again. So all those details that we have in the portal are visible here, and I'm going to go ahead and post. And because we're integrated to PJC, we want to update the expenses to the PJC time card. So there's a time card entry created as well as an AP invoice created for reimbursement. Okay. So if I go to PJC, much like we saw with the time entry, we record these transactions to a PJC time card to get those costs updated. So there's EV6, today's date, with the expense detail based on my subcontractor travel expense for air, hotel, and taxi. And it's been set up as work in progress and billable work, and my flight to Chicago and the convention details. So that updates the PJC time card entry, and then for reimbursement purposes, we're set up in accounts payable as an invoice batch. It's listed as an expense generated batch, and it will be the last entry in this batch. If there was no open batch, it would just create a new batch automatically. But there's my travel expenses. EV6 is the invoice number in AP, and I've allocated those travel expenses. Now the drill down is supported from AP down into Resource Manager, so that if people want to see more details around the expense report, then we drill from AP back into the expense entry, so you can see the approval audit trail, who reviewed and approved these expenses, any supporting documents, and again, the totals with the document details. So we give you access to the entire audit trail from the source document that's created in Sage 300, which originally came from the web portal and is now converted into a transaction and then updated to AP for reimbursement purposes. And we've also created the expense transaction and the time card entry for project and job cost for those of you that might be using the project and job cost module. So in summary, we've reviewed the timesheet, overtime, and leave tracking capability of Resource Manager along with the employee expense, and shown how by using the ESS or Employee Self-Service Portal, it's easy for your remote employees or non-accounting employees to be able to submit expenses, timesheets, overtime, and leave requests, get them approved and updated seamlessly into Sage 300. We hope that you found this presentation useful, and if you do have any additional questions about Resource Manager, please reach out to your local Sage 300 business partner who can assist you with getting information on pricing and availability of the different functionality. Or if you'd like a special one-on-one presentation, we're more than happy to schedule that with you in conjunction with your business partner to answer any questions that you have or to review some of these features in more detail. We thank you again for your time and hope that you have a great day. Thank you very much.